We begin with Maine, where more than 500 Mainers joined a rally for Democratic U.S. Senate candidate Graham Plattner last night in his first public event since new allegations rocked his campaign.
Now, as every single piece of that past and journey gets dug up, litigated, and weaponized, you have my back. And to all of you out there, Maine, I will always have your back.
The Plattner campaign also announced yesterday that it raised more than $200,000 in the 24 hours since the New York Times ran a report about allegations against him by ex-girlfriends. In that report, 3 women who dated Plattner alleged, quote, toxic and unsettling behavior. One former partner, Lindsay Fiffield, said Plattner regularly grabbed her by the shoulders, sometimes hard enough to leave marks, and on one occasion yanked her out of a cab by her wrist after an argument when she wanted to stay in the car. During one argument, she recalled that he twisted her arm behind her back, shoved her into a bedroom, and held the door closed from the other side so she couldn't get out, telling her to remain there until she was calm. Eventually, Ms. Fiffield said she fell asleep and left the next morning. The Times also reported that 3 other women who dated Plattner and now support his campaign described positive experiences with him and said he never made them feel physically unsafe. Thursday on MS Now's All In with Chris Hayes, Plattner denied any accusation that he had been physically abusive with a partner.
There are some allegations in this piece that I just want to be kind of unequivocal about are simply not true. Anything alleging physicality, anything alleging that I knew what my tattoo was, these are the statements of someone who's politically motivated.
In a statement to the New York Times, the Plattner campaign questioned Fiffield's motivations, saying, let's be very clear. This is a lifelong GOP operative who's dedicated her career to electing Republicans. Fiffield rejected that characterization, saying she has no connection to Senator Susan Collins' campaign and insisted that politics have played no role in her decision to speak publicly. She added, quote, I know it looks like a bitter ex-girlfriend Republican trying to take down a Democrat. It has nothing to do with that. If he was running as a Republican, I would be doing this exact same thing.
This is a tough one for Democrats.
Yep.
The thing that I think is really interesting is the difference between what's happening on the ground in Maine and what's happening in the kind of the larger Democratic ecosystem. The larger Democratic ecosystem, the folks that we talk to probably more than the folks in Maine, is they are concerned about kind of what's the next shoe to drop? Because shoes have been dropping since he jumped in. He told senators that there was nothing, even though the New York Times story was coming. And there's a question of if Democrats want to be the party that has the moral high ground when it comes to Donald Trump and other scandals, can they have someone who's scandal plagued themselves? Mainers seem to say that's fine, that at the end of the day, it costs more for Mainers to not have him on the ballot than to have him on the ballot. And I think that is something that's really interesting playing out here.
I mean, it seems to me that when you have a convicted felon who's been credibly accused of
found
liable for sexual assault, sitting in the Oval Office, it sort of gives permission to lots of people who otherwise, in other times, would never have thought in a million years to run for office.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point about the dilemma that Democrats find themselves in, they've got this flawed candidate. And we're going to find out soon enough whether Mainers want this flawed candidate to represent them in the Senate.
Yeah, I think...
Hold forth, Jackie. Go on.
Look, I think that there's certainly a conversation about whether or not, if you're a Republican or a Democrat, is there room for making amends in your life, a sort of a path to redemption. I think the question for Mainers at the end of the day is, do they want to be a part of that path that Graham Plattner is currently on? Do they believe that Graham Plattner respects women after reading that detailed New York Times dive? And do they feel like he's an honest broker? Do they feel like he's someone who is going to be transparent and be forthright with them after seeing sort of the track record of his claims over the past few months and whether or not they have amounted to the truth.
And people have over and over again, whether it is the New York Times when he did that podcast with them, or the senators said, is there anything else? And he keeps saying no. And that seems to be not true and kind of now unbelievable. And so the questions I think that journalists have is when we are always asking who are the kinds of people who are coming to Congress, who are the kinds of people that are getting more power here, it's a question of whether or not you can trust what they're saying. And at this point, I think there's a larger question of trust. And I know Donald, but I feel like you can have a conversation about him without having a conversation about Donald Trump.
Well, but the point I was about to make, and I know we've got to move on, but this might also explain why, to the whole point about is another shoe to drop?
Yeah.
No, there isn't, but another one drops. That's probably why Governor Mills only suspended her campaign. She did not drop out and keeps reminding folks, I'm still on the ballot.
I'm still here. You can still vote for me if you want.
Let's bring in MS Now congressional reporter Kevin Fry. He was actually at the Plattner rally last night. He joins us now from Bar Harbor, Maine. Kevin, what went down last night?
Yeah, I mean, we're outside of the event space from last night, which was pretty much at capacity for the evening. And one of the questions, as you were just kind of all highlighting, was, is the enthusiasm that we know has been building around Plattner, was it still there after this very kind of dramatic week for his campaign? And some of these folks that were attending, as they were walking in, we were talking to them, and they were kind of candid in saying, maybe not as much as a few weeks ago, but they still insist they're standing by their man. To touch on that one part that you were hitting on, Jonathan, I think at the table, this idea of, Trump is in office over the last decade. How has that changed the permission structures? And several voters, when I kind of brought up Trump, Ken Paxton, were very adamant, well, what Graham Plattner is accused of pales in comparison to what those two individuals are accused of having done. So here's just a sense of what we heard last night.
Well, I think, candidly, the Democratic Party's come up short in a lot of ways in terms of, whitewashing our candidates and being so morally elitist and kind of entitled at times. We have to be willing to get dirty.
His baggage is nowhere near their baggage. We're talking about people that are felons and people that take bribes.
I really kind of think that we all have skeletons in our closet, and we've all made mistakes, especially when we're younger.
And that was really a refrain we heard time and time again, this kind of redemption arc. We can, have faith and forgiveness, given that he might have changed his ways or improved his life. Now, the headliner last night, the man who organized this event, was Congressman Ro Khanna of California. And he's been very outright in saying that he is standing by Plattner, even though he says that some of the reporting from the New York Times this week has been toxic. He said last night to the crowd, there's no reason to forgive him for his past actions, or we cannot condone it. But basically saying the man stands for good things. We need to move forward. And so I asked him, looking at the prospect that he, is being bandied about as a 2028 candidate, if this Plattner experiment doesn't go right, if they lose the Senate race here in Maine, is that a punch to his credibility as a member of the Democratic coalition? And here's what he said on that front.
No one remembers endorsements. What they look at is your vision for the country, for your district. I think what matters is, are you willing to stand up for your values? I'm here because Plattner's for single-payer health care, because he's opposed to the war in Iran, because he's opposed to what happened in Gaza. And people will see that I fought for my values.
And I just wanted to specify that Khanna, during the remarks last night, said that no one should make excuses for Plattner's past. One other thing, as you all were touching at, this idea of Janet Mills, something to keep an eye on Tuesday night is there any sort of against Plattner, and what does that say about the path forward here?
MS Now's Kevin Fry in Bar Harbor, Maine for us. Thank you very much, sir. Get some lobster for us, please. Joining us now, senior Washington editor from Semaphore, Alana Shore. Y'all like lobster. And David Drucker, MS Now contributor and senior writer for The Dispatch. Thank you both for joining us at the table. Alana, I'm going to just start with you. The conversation we've been having, the thing that I've been focused on is how different the voters sound than kind of the Democrats that you talk to who are operatives in D.C. or who are running around the Hill. How do you explain that dissonance?
Well, I think a lot of these reporters are frankly fed up with the Trump administration. They see Plattner as a fighter. They kind of buy a lot of his brand, as I will speak for the working class. I'm going to stand up to Susan Collins, who's a rubber stamp. And they kind of want to look past this more readily than some of the elected Dems.
Yeah. It's what does that tell us about where the Democratic voters are right now?
You know, I am not sure, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think Graham Plattner, honestly, might be an outlier because he's young, because he's got charisma on a level that some other candidates might not have. This might be kind of a lightning in a bottle thing, where Maine particularly, there's a lot of expats, some younger voters who might turn out relative to kind of the older electorate that Collins has benefited from in the past. It might not be replicatable, but it does potentially tell us something really important.
Yeah.
Well, David, maybe the reason why Plattner has, at this point, staying power is because of something that Ro Khanna said at last night's rally. Let's watch this.
The character that really matters right now is the character to be willing to stand up to the powers that be. The Democratic Party, from Schumer to Sanders, is united with a single goal. We will defeat Susan Collins in November.
So that, to me, right there is the single biggest argument for Plattner. Democrats have blinders on. They're sort of, in a lot of ways, emulating what Republicans have done for generations, which is, this is my candidate. We need that seat, and we need that person in the seat to advance our agenda.
Yeah, you stole my line. I'm going to go home now.
Okay.
And what I mean is, what I was going to say is, for the past 10 years, a lot of Democrats have been perplexed. How can Republicans support Donald Trump given all of the ethical baggage, right? I mean, January 6th obviously became its own thing and was particularly egregious. But, in his history with women, his history in business, the fact that he doesn't always tell the truth. And we can go on and on and on. How can Republicans, we just talked about this a few weeks ago at this table, how can Republicans support Ken Paxton, who I have said maybe the most scandal-plagued politician I've ever covered? And the answer when you talk to Republicans is always, he fights. The other side is so bad that, yeah, I don't really feel good about how ethically challenged, my candidate is, but, what am I going to do? And then the other thing, and we heard that from the clip there in Maine that our colleague played, everybody's got skeletons in their closet. I have a quote like that from a Paxton supporter in Texas, verbatim from January, why they were voting for Paxton over Cornyn. He fights, and everybody's got skeletons. So I think what we've learned is that American voters, regardless of party, are all the same. They are angry at the establishment. They're worried about the future of the country. They're willing to look past the problems of their side because the other side is so egregious. And I think this is right now a sort of defining character of our politics.
Yeah.